back to another edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. I'm Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
And Chip, I wanted to ask you, what did you do with your bye week?
I enjoyed watching other teams play. I would have enjoyed watching Purdue validate their victory against Ohio State if they had been able to pull off a victory against Michigan State, but they did not do that. If anything, that loss to Purdue looks even worse. 1 week removed. But I did get an opportunity to see the Iowa Penn State game, which went down pretty much close to the wire, and so it was good to. I'm one of these people that I can never get enough college football. So once college football is done, I pretty much, I don't want to say that I'm like a, that I go into hibernation mode, but I'm pretty sad and solemn. So I try to, even on bye weeks, try to enjoy watching as much college football as possible.
I do too. Unfortunately, my wife is smart enough to know when Ohio State is off. And so she plans fun little things for me, like going to her friend's parents' anniversary party. And I barely know these people. I've met them. I couldn't have told you their names before Saturday, their first names, but that's where I was. And to my astonishment, there was no football on the TV at this gathering. You would think that, for a 70th anniversary party, there would be lots of college football on TV, but there was not. And so I didn't get to see as much as I'd like to. I did get to see Texas and Oklahoma State when I got home, so that was good. Watching Tom Herman get roasted by the Cowboys. But not a lot of football for me, and I really wanted to see some of these other games. But getting back to your point about Purdue and Michigan State, just know this. When you go down to the crossroads and you summon the crossroads demon and you sell your soul to beat Ohio State, and you're Purdue, because you have to do that when you're Purdue, you got to read the fine print, man. It's not like you're going to win out from that point on. You sell your soul, it's gone. You've got your win over Ohio State, and there's no guarantees beyond that. So read the fine print, kids, when you go out and summon those crossroad demons.
You're also discounting the fact that Michigan State actually had a cohesive defensive strategy against Purdue, unlike Ohio State.
I don't know what that is. I don't know what that even means.
We've experienced it before. It's just that it's kind of like it's like fading in that rearview mirror. It's kind of like going, it's beyond the horizon. It's like getting more and more faint as time passes.
All right, Chip. Well, we don't have a game to recap this week. We will get into Ohio State's upcoming tilt with Nebraska, a Nebraska team that's suddenly on a roll after a big win over Bethune-Cookman. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But before we do, the Urban Meyer press conference this week and the coaching staff being interviewed last week, after the loss to Purdue, why don't you give a brief primer on what came out of these events?
Well, last week, Ryan Day as well as Greg Schiano were involved with meeting with the media and talking about, for lack of a better word, what ails the Buckeyes on offensively and defensively. Now, I would like to take some sense of belief that offensively that Ryan Day, just because of the fact that Urban Meyer is so actively involved in the offense, that I am more and more confident that the offense is going to, if not necessarily look different, but will be able to function much better in two critical areas, the red zone and the overall running game, because Urban Meyer has made it a point of saying that is something that has to be fixed, needs to be taken care of. I mean, we've all heard a lot of the Urban Meyerisms over the last several years, so you could just imagine, it has to be fixed, we're on it, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. What was disconcerting was to hear Greg Schiano talk about how the defensive scheme. There's basically nothing wrong with it. How the linebackers playing up so close to the defensive line that's actually, like we're getting so close. And there's basically nothing wrong with the scheme. It's more in the players' execution of the scheme. So that has me kind of, I don't want to say nervous, but more kind of, secretly, I shouldn't say secretly because we're talking about it on a Ohio State podcast, has me questioning publicly what, we mentioned this last week, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, how that is going to impact Ohio State beginning this Saturday at noon against the Nebraska Cornhuskers, because it's the kind of thing that Purdue said specifically, Jeff Brom said, we saw on film that their linebackers were playing close up to the line of scrimmage, and we figured we could attack them that way. So you can't tell me that Scott Frost or any of the other coaches that Ohio State still has to oppose in the remaining weeks of the 2018 season aren't going to do the same thing that has worked so well for all of the other teams that Ohio State has played so far this season.
Yeah, I don't know what is going on with that. I don't know if that's some new thing they've fallen in love with that they saw other teams do, or what is going on, because it's not something that we've done in the past, not something we've seen in the past with this, walking the linebackers up to where you're looking at 6 men across the line of scrimmage, sometimes 7, and then you got the corners way out on the edges, and then the safeties are back. And once you get past the line of scrimmage, there's a whole lot of green. So you get a lineman to the second level, or you pin somebody inside, and we've seen it time and time again this year. Whatever Ohio State thinks they're doing with this scheme, it's not something that they're good at running. So whether that's the players, whether the coaches aren't coaching it well, I don't know what it is, but it needs to stop and just go back to your base defense. Give up your 3 or 4 yards and try to make teams beat you with consistently making play after play after play, rather than hitting you for big plays and beating you in with very few number of explosion plays. And that's I think the philosophy that Jim Tressel had, and that's why punting was winning for him. The most important play in football: pin the other team deep and play sound defense and make them beat you by having to execute long drives. And that is not something that anyone has had to do against Ohio State. It's like, oh, are we backed up? Well, here's a 93-yard pass.
And it's one of these things. This wasn't necessarily brought up during the press conferences per se, but I believe, the idea that this coaching staff on the defensive side of the ball, they were anticipating having the defensive line causing or wreaking havoc on the opposing offenses, which would, that idea of that intensive pressure that the defensive line was applying, that the linebackers would be quick in to scoop up and capitalize on the offense's mistakes. Well, as we're well aware of, as every Ohio State fan is well aware of, all right, Ohio State's been without Nick Bosa for several games, and the rest of the defensive line, I'm not faulting them, but you have a number of the players, on Ohio State's defense, like Draymond Jones nursing injury, and Jonathan Cooper and Chase Young haven't been nearly the kind of impact players on the defensive line as a Nick Bosa. So if you were basing your scheme on defensive line pressure, it's not working because the defensive line pressure isn't there. So to your point, playing more in a base 4-3 with your linebackers off, and like you said, yeah, you might be conceding some of the yards, but the linebackers being able to read where the play is going and not necessarily get caught up in the offensive line in the blocking scheme. Because I completely agree with you. As you said, once these players break past the linebackers, and since the corners are playing so far out, there's just nothing but an ample amount of green grass and or turf, depending on where we're playing the game, of course. for the opposing offenses to eat up ample amount of yardage and points sometimes.
Yeah, and the other thing it does is it leaves some guys in the spaces where teams have been passing against Ohio State, those slant passes. If you get a quick enough read, you're going to be standing right where the guy's slanting into. So there's not going to be big yards after catch. It really comes down to, I think, a couple of things. If you play more of a base defense, you get Baron Browning out there more because he can run, whereas Tough Borland can't run. Sure, you're not going to get a minus 3 yard TFL on a lot of running plays, but you're going to have a chance to stop them for 2 or 3 yards, and you'll have the ability to flow sideline to sideline. You got guys that can run. It just seems like the personnel Ohio State has. They're not good at running this defense that they've been running, and why not go back to basics? You and I have talked about this all season. When things aren't going well, you go back to basics and, simplify the game. And I think that that's something that Ohio State, hopefully, I think that's something they should do. Hopefully it's something they looked at doing in this off week. So that we don't, all have blood vessels in our brains explode every week when these big plays happen.
Oh, that quite a picture there. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the idea that the coaching staff on the defensive side of the ball, they are completely devoted to their scheme and not necessarily recognizing the talent that they have on the roster if it necessarily fits the scheme well.
Yeah.
So one can only hope that would, and I'm purely speculating, is that perhaps there was, according to Urban Meyer, that he met, they worked for 12 hours on various aspects, offensively and defensively, like the Monday after the Purdue loss. That hopefully that conversation or conversations were held about, let's simplify this. Let's get back to what our players can do well. Let's put them in positions to succeed versus, expecting them to master a scheme that maybe athletically they're not well suited for, because, kind of taking it back from, like from the front seven, we've been talking about the secondary, like Ohio State fans have, I'll just say it, have become spoiled over the last several years with the idea of, in the secondary, well, there's going to be a corner that is going to be a first round draft choice, and it's just kind of this assembly line, because I'm sure you've heard it. We don't rebuild, we reload. Well, the reality is, and this is not meant to disparage the talent on the roster, but they're inexperienced. I mean, by and large, when you think about Kendall Sheffield, Damon Arnett, Jeffrey Okuda, they're still relatively, that's still a relatively inexperienced secondary.
Yeah.
I mean, and then throw in the fact that at the other safety position, Isaiah Pryor is a first year starter. So Jordan Fuller, he's kind of running himself ragged back there, trying to, make sure to minimize the mistakes that are being made in the secondary. So, it's like I said, the defense definitely needs to, I think, just to kind of, so we don't have that gruesome visual that you described. They need to come out and play much better against Nebraska than they've had in the previous game so far this season.
And they'll have to, because Nebraska's, for all of Nebraska's failings, they have a pretty good offense. And they seem to be getting better every week on that side of the ball. So, but we'll get to that in a bit. I did want to mention that, you talked about Nick Bosa, and that to me is the big difference maker. I think people forget just how special a player like Nick Bosa is, that he's a guy that occupies 2 offensive linemen every play, sometimes even a third, and that really opens things up for everyone else on the defense, because even with 2 or even 3 guys on him, he can still sometimes make plays. He can still set the edge. He still does a lot of good things even when he does manage to get blocked. without him in there, you can double team Draymond Jones. You can double team Chase Young wherever you need to at the point of attack. You're no longer devoting extra bodies to Nick Bosa, and that it just cascades. It's it's not it's not happening for Ohio State's defensive line. You can see that in the pass rush. They're not as quick to the ball as they were with Nick Bosa. And even when Nick Bosa was in there, even if he didn't get in there, other guys did because of what I just said. He opens things up for other people. So that's part of the problem on this defense, but there are good players out there. They have not, I don't think, been put in great positions to succeed and do what they do best. And it's been a chore all season long. It turns out, Chip, that if you continuously churn out lockdown cornerbacks who leave early, eventually that catches up with you.
Yeah. Well, I think Gerd said it best, kind of with regards to the departure of Nick Bosa. And I couldn't agree with him more when he said how Nick Bosa declaring for the NFL draft, or at least his beginning his preparations and recuperation in for the NFL draft, that Ohio State fans can't get mad about Nick Bosa when Urban Meyer makes it so front and center during the recruiting process, especially on signing day. And he to paraphrase Urban Meyer, saying, with these players we can only anticipate that we're going to have them for 3 years. Mm-hmm. So you can't say on signing day, we hope we have this guy for 3 years, because more than likely he's going to go off to the NFL. And then when he goes off to the NFL after 3 years, get mad. Right. You just can't. The way that we talked about it last week on the show is true, is that like the selfishness on my part towards Nick Bosa has nothing to do with what he's doing in terms of getting ready for the NFL draft. It was more because of the fact that we got to see so little of him after the anticipation of, over the previous years, he was only, I don't want to say like a part-time player, but he was in that rotation. Mm-hmm. He was with Sam Hubbard, and he was, Jalen Holmes and, Tyquan Lewis and and so that deep rotation, it's like, finally we're going to get a chance to see Nick Bosa as a full-time contributor. And then even in the first couple games, he was removed from playing because Ohio State was so dominant. Okay, well, don't want him to get hurt. And then against TCU, he was playing great, and then he did get hurt. And it's like, that's it. Like, that's all we get to see of Nick Bosa in his final year. So, yeah, my long-winded answer to your very good point is that you can't minimize the impact the loss of Nick Bosa on this defense has had. But I also think you would agree with me here is that the coaching staff is not doing these players any favors either by the schemes and the formations that they're putting them in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that I'll even go back further than you with my selfishness. I wanted Joey Bosa to play his senior year just so we could get a year of a Bosa on both ends.
That would have been something. It was definitely like, again, it's nice to have those kind of dreams and hopes and everything. But yeah, I mean, it was. I always looked at it like, okay, as soon as kind of when Joey Bosa, when he was playing here, what I remember when Nick was in high school, just the things that you would read online about. You'd see these performances of Joey, and people would start talking about supposedly Joey's younger brother Nick is better than Joey. So it's kind of like, I hope he comes to Ohio State. So then when he did announce that he was coming to Ohio State, I was like, oh man, I can't wait to see, what he does and how he plays, and the mere fact that he wore the same jersey number as his brother did. I mean, it's just. It's always going to be one of those, like, what might have been kind of things, mm-hmm. In terms of, when something is taken from you prematurely, And in this case, like I said, we kind of thought that, all right, like Nick Bosa, this was going to be his last year, but how dominant it was going to be, and nobody anticipated what happened. It's like, man, I didn't really get a chance to see everything that I thought I was going to.
Yeah, I actually talked to John Bosa, the father of Nick and Joey, a couple of years back, and I addressed that with him. I said, people say that Nick is better than Joey. What do you, obviously, you're the dad. You can't really take sides. What do you say to that as a guy who played in the NFL? And he said that it wasn't necessarily a matter of Nick being better than Joey. The deal was that every time Joey came home, he would show Nick a lot of what Larry Brown showed him in terms of handwork and things like that. So he was ahead of where Joey was at the same age because he was basically learning from Larry Brown through Joey.
You mean Larry Johnson?
Larry Johnson, I'm sorry. It's I've been watching The Deuce, and there's a character named Larry Brown on there, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. But yeah, Larry Johnson. Sorry about that.
I didn't know if like Larry Brown, the basketball coach,
no,
if he was showing him stuff too. but no, I understood what you meant. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Considering the athleticism that is throughout, the Bosa household, as you said, John Bosa played in the NFL with the Dolphins, and and the fact that what he learned during his pro career, and then Larry Johnson is the best defensive line coach in college football,
right?
And the fact that was transferred on to Joey and Nick, it's. As Urban Meyer said, it's like, if there's another Bosa out there, he has a scholarship waiting for him in Columbus. So can only hope, but I'm not going to put too much hope and stock into that.
They should be cloning him right now at Robinson Laboratories.
There you go.
Anyway, so one more thing we need to talk about from the pressers since we last talked was, of course, some people that had not talked to Urban Meyer, had not had any inside knowledge from anyone in Urban Meyer's life, had absolutely no business reporting or speculating even about Urban Meyer, decided that this was going to be Urban Meyer's last year. And that includes the well-known, certainly doesn't have an agenda, very well-respected journalist Paul Feinbaum.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it certainly didn't help that Paul Feinbaum, who has been one of the most vocal in his enmity towards Ohio State and Urban Meyer from everything that went down with the Zach Smith affair. He has been nonstop in making suggestions that. This is going to be Urban Meyer's last year, and that was, throughout the summer, and how Urban Meyer, like the way that he handled the whole Zach Smith thing. And so then, of course, Ohio State struggled. And as we all know, they lost to Purdue, and while, taking to the airwaves to say, Urban Meyer doesn't look right, it's more than likely going to be his last year. So during the press conference, I want to give credit, to the beat reporters that asked Urban Meyer, are you going to coach next year? And Urban Meyer said definitively that he plans on coaching at Ohio State. And, it had to be asked because if you're ESPN and you're willing to give a public forum to Paul Feinbaum to make completely uncorroborated statements that this is going to be Urban Meyer's last year at Ohio State. All that did to Ohio State during the bye week was, Urban Meyer and the coaching staff had to, when they were out on the road recruiting, they had to completely squash those rumors. Because other schools, it wouldn't surprise me if a number of them were from the SEC, but definitely within the Big Ten, a lot of the top players in the country that Ohio State is actively recruiting, not only for the class that could sign, beginning in December for the 2019 season. But beyond, Ohio State is playing defense on the recruiting trail.
Mm-hmm.
They had to do that last year, when Jackson Carman, who is an offensive lineman from the state of Ohio, decided instead of signing with Ohio State, he decided to sign with Clemson. And the idea that during the press conference at Jackson Carman basically said, like Dabo Swinney said, like Urban, he's kind of on the back nine, like he's not going to be there that long. So that was last year. Now you're giving, if you're ESPN, you're giving Paul Feinbaum a microphone and telling him, yeah, why don't you go out there and spread completely unsubstantiated rumors some more to hurt Ohio State. So it obviously wasn't, in my humble opinion, was not the best use of time for Urban Meyer to be talking about retirement rumors when you've got Nebraska coming in after 2 straight wins and Ohio State coming off of a loss. But I certainly am grateful to the beat reporters that brought up about dealing with the rumors, about any concerns about Urban Meyer's health, making sure that everyone understands he's going to be there, his plans are to be there, to kind of, if there's any negative recruiting, to kind of, hopefully, if not completely eliminate it, slow it down substantially.
Yeah, I want to make sure everybody knows that I think that I actually abused sarcasm earlier, but I want everybody to know that I wasn't being serious when I said that Paul Feinbaum is a fine journalist with no agenda. I kind of meant the opposite of that, and he's a great recruiting tool for Nick Saban.
Yeah,
with a heavy emphasis on the word tool. And it was I sat and I watched him and Mike Greenberg talking about how Urban Meyer wasn't going to come back next year because of the way he looks and the way he is carrying himself on the sideline. And I thought, what is this? What kind of garbage are you spewing on national television based on nothing? And it was it really took me aback. I mean, I tend to not. I just happened to have it on. I was flipping through and I got distracted and I heard what he said. I think I probably saw the Ohio State logo on the bottom of the screen or something. Like, okay, what are they saying? But I generally don't watch ESPN unless it's a live game or 30 for 30 because they've lost so much credibility and they put so much emphasis on the E in ESPN, which stands for entertainment, of course, and much less on the S for sports, which was so prevalent when the network grew to prominence. When they were the only ones showing a lot of sports. They were the only ones out there really championing it, and especially sports journalism. People like Bob Lee and Tom Mees and guys like that. And now it's just kind of a shell. It's really tabloid. There's a lot of shows where basically 2 or 3 people yell at each other and don't let each other finish sentences and just try to out hot take each other. And that just seemed like the hottest of the hot takes to me, to just say, just to put that out there, just so irresponsible considering the fact that recruits still watch this programming, and to say, yeah, he doesn't look right to me, so he's probably done after this year.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of, when it comes to Urban Meyer doesn't look right, and I thought, a player that you and I know that we both mutually respect, Chris Spielman. Now, it wasn't on ESPN, but Chris Spielman said if he had the opportunity to talk to Urban Meyer about the way that he is looking, or the way that I guess if you want to say presents himself, that the speculation is that that there's still some unresolved anger by Urban Meyer towards the Ohio State administration for the way that they did not fully support him during the whole Zach Smith situation. Mm-hmm. And the way that Chris Spielman, for lack of a better word, he basically said, this is your dream job. How is it that your dream job is making you miserable? At some point you've got to put behind, if there's bitterness and anger about the way that you were treated, you've got to let that go and focus on the here and now, which is doing everything within your capacity to get Ohio State better, because this is what you say is the thing that you love among the most in the world. So hopefully Spielman has had an opportunity to, if not talk directly to Urban Meyer, because as we all know, Urban Meyer is a very busy man, and so is Chris Spielman with his radio program as well as his television analyst duties. But hopefully that advice was possibly passed on to Urban Meyer, and he'll take it to heart. It certainly seemed like it when he was answering the questions at his press conference about the concerns that people have about him and about his health. And he, in so many words, said, my big concern is getting Ohio State fixed and right and making sure that we're ready to finish strong in November.
Yeah, I think a lot of what he looks like and how he comports himself, and maybe he looks a little tired and angry, probably has a lot to do with how his team's playing this year.
Right.
This is not played like an Urban Meyer team, which is so shocking considering he was forced to miss a good chunk of preseason camp.
Well, somebody said, I can't remember exactly who it was, but they said, "Oh, it seems like the games have been bothering you, Coach." And I think he said something like, "The games have been bothering me for 30 years." And it brought a laugh from the members in the press room. So that's, the guy wears his emotions on his sleeve. You know, he always, let's take out, how he looks on the sideline. I mean, think about it. I mean, when he, even when Ohio State was winning, if Ohio State would make a mistake, you would see that anger and, like, I can't believe, this happened, like that kind of a thing, like the idea of at the tail end of the Ohio State Michigan game when Curtis Samuel was able to win the game in overtime, he immediately collapsed, like basically like on the field, not from irritation, but just like, thank God this is over, because it was that draining of an experience. He was thrilled that it worked out positively, but still, I mean, like, my point being, the fact that he's showing exasperation and irritation on the sidelines this year, I agree with you. I think it's more a reflection of the poor performances by the Ohio State running game, the lack of scoring within the red zone, and the poor overall performance of the defensive unit.
Yeah, lots of rumors and innuendo, and really, I mean, just irresponsible to put that stuff out there. There was an outfit called footballscoop.com that put out something about how there was friction between Urban and Gene Smith, and they put the kibosh on that pretty quick in the last week, too.
Yes. If anything, if just to kind of the speculation about friction between Urban Meyer and Gene Smith, I'm with you. I don't see it as there's issues between Urban Meyer and Gene Smith. If anything, if there are lingering issues of animosity, it's probably Urban Meyer towards the president of the university, Michael Drake, and any board members who were kind of on Drake's side, but to borrow Chris Spielman's, in my opinion, sage advice, you've got to let that go and keep moving forward, because there's a lot still to play for. Specifically, the idea of winning a share of the Big Ten title. The Big Ten East, is still within their grasp, and possibly winning the Big Ten title if they advance that far to the championship game in Indianapolis that first weekend in December.
Yeah, I'm glad that all of this stuff got put to rest, and it's I agree with you about the if Urban is mad at anybody, it probably is Michael Drake. I did get the sense that Michael Drake wanted to either punish Urban more severely or even fire him outright. I think that he was taking a hard line on this, and I don't think that he had the support among the board. I wasn't in the room. I don't have anything to really base that on other than body language and stuff that's crept out in the media, some of it, and some people I trust in the know that kind of alluded to some of that stuff, but they wouldn't come right out and say it. So, but it is what, week 9, Ohio State's 9th game coming up, and I think it's time to just put that stuff to rest and see how the team does for the rest of the season. Let's get back to football, Chip. One thing that happened since we recorded last week was the announcement that Austin Mack is out for the season. How does that affect Ohio State's offense in terms of, obviously Austin Mack was a bit of a security blanket for Dwayne Haskins?
Yeah, I think it impacts them dramatically. If anything, this is an opportunity for players like Benjamin Victor as well as Jalen Harris, who they played the same position, I guess within the wide receiver rotation as Austin Mack. This is an opportunity for Victor and Harris to truly rise up and show that they're deserving of more playing time. Certainly hope that Austin Mack, if the opportunity presents itself for him to come back in a bowl game, maybe he will do that. But it might be in Austin Mack's best interest not to come back. You don't want to risk further injury that might impact the 2019 season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember. I want to get your opinion on what you think of this era that we live in of specialization. This X, these guys are X's, these guys are Y's, these guys are Z's. Back in the day when I was growing up, and I'm pretty old, you basically lined up your best receivers. Did that receiver go down? Well, your next best receiver goes in. It wasn't a case of this guy can only run these routes and this guy can only line up in the slot. There were guys that came in on third down, third and long passing downs that lined up in the slot, and they were called possession receivers. But by and large, they were on the field quite a bit too.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. I think there's something to be said about your wide receivers all being able to play no matter how they line up, regardless of whether they're lining up kind of, as a flanker or a split end, like within the parlance of the Ohio State terminology, like the Austin Mack, was more kind of like that X receiver, so to speak, and then, you have Paris Campbell playing the H, that hybrid wide receiver running back and all that. So we'll see. I'm purely speculating that Ben Victor and Jalen Harris are going to be the beneficiaries of Austin Mack's injury and the fact that, they're kind of like comparable size. Now granted, Victor is listed at 6'4", and Jalen Harris is 6'5", and Austin Mack is listed at 6'2". That's why I'm saying like comparable size per se. Where who's to say that maybe the Ohio State coaching staff says, something? How about we put Paris Campbell out at the same position that Austin Mack was, and then this way we can have KJ Hill playing that H position, Terry McLaurin playing that other wide receiver position, and then we've got Campbell, all the like our 3 starters, seniors. I screwed that up because KJ Hill's a redshirt junior, but my point being that to kind of echo what you just said, that instead of it necessarily being this guy only plays like the X position or the Z position or per se, that they would be a little bit more like, we're just going to play our best receivers.
It's funny because they don't take that same approach with the offensive line. You'll hear it every year. We want our best 5 guys out there.
Yeah,
and they move guys all over. I mean, this guy doesn't come in as a guard and stay as a guard. He's a right guard, then he's a left guard, then he's the center. Sometimes guys do get pigeonholed left and right, but they don't, by and large, do that with the offensive line the way they do that with the wide receivers.
And it doesn't sound as though there's going to be any switch in personnel on the offensive line. Urban Meyer alluded to the fact that Brady Taylor and Brandon Bone are getting closer to playing, but did not make any kind of definitive statement that they for sure are ready to go. He said that they might be able to play Saturday, but he did not give any indication that any change in personnel along the offensive line is coming. So it kind of begs that question: what has Ohio State done to simplify the offense to make the offensive line and the running game that much more productive than they have been in the previous games?
I don't know, but I hope they did something. At this point, I mean, what are we looking at? Almost looking at a medical red shirt for Bowen at this point.
I'm not. I'm not, and that's where my ignorance of how that would work for Brandon Bowen, how that would work, simply because he redshirted as a true freshman. So to your point, would he still qualify for a medical redshirt? I would think so.
Yeah, I
but
think so.
It's just those injury designations are always something that you have to petition the NCAA, and I think you would agree those can go any which way. So yeah, it might be at that point where it might be in his best interest to have a medical redshirt.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. We will find out on Saturday. Why don't we turn our attention to Saturday, Chip, and the Nebraska Cornhuskers? Most years, this would be one of the marquee games on the schedule. This would be, a couple of ranked teams and sometimes highly ranked teams. And, we've seen Nebraska with the coaching change this year to Scott Frost coming over from UCF, going home, as it were. And Nebraska has some talent, obviously, because they are they're a big school that recruits pretty well. They didn't do themselves any favors the last few years with the coaching decision and the way that they recruited then. But Nebraska, after a very slow start and some heartbreaking losses late in games, put together a couple of wins in a row. And a large part of that is the offense and the way the offense looks right now. Nebraska Cornhuskers are 19th in the country in total offense. They're putting together 471 yards per game on average. As an Ohio State fan and seeing what Ohio State's defense has been doing, that scares the bejesus out of me.
Oh, and let's not we talked about a familiar name, but to see that familiar name line up for the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and that would be they have a wide receiver by the name of J.D. Spielman. Mm-hmm. Now, he is the nephew of Chris Spielman, Rick Spielman's adopted son.
Right. He's the GM of the Minnesota Vikings.
Yes, and J.D. last year caught 11 passes for 200 yards, as well as a touchdown. Now, Ohio State routed Nebraska 56-14 last year, but the point being that we've been so critical, fairly, I would say, of the Ohio State defense. When you've got an offensive weapon such as J.D. Spielman, you have another very capable wide receiver on the other side in Stanley Morgan, who's a senior. And they have a very, very dangerous quarterback, true freshman Adrian Martinez, who was one of the players that Ohio State recruited last year late in the process. And Adrian Martinez was going I believe he was going to Tennessee, and then decided at the last minute when Scott Frost was hired by Nebraska that he gave up his commitment and decided to go out to Nebraska. And yes, as a true freshman, he's had some moments of mistakes, but he's, as I said, he's the type of guy that he's dangerous not only with his arm but also with his legs. He's been playing much better throughout the season. He came back from injury. I think he got hurt against Colorado in the season opener. This is a team that they're coming off 2 straight wins. Now, granted, Bethune-Cookman did not really give them much of a battle. I know you were at that anniversary party. I will tell you that I was kind of trying to keep my interest in watching Nebraska Bethune-Cookman, but it did not really hold me. The Purdue-Michigan State game, since that was a lot closer, during that same time period. That's what I was preoccupied with. But Nebraska, they, as you said, like they had a few losses, in the season opener to Colorado. They lost 33-28. The next week they lost to Troy 24-19. And then earlier in October, they were at Northwestern and they lost 34-31 in overtime. So you're talking 3 losses there by a total of 13 points. That would make, like the fact that, like right now, Nebraska, they're sitting there with a record of 2-6, but I think you would agree, like 3 of those losses could have gone either way. Some of which, like you said, of the painful variety because of some really careless penalties late in the game by Nebraska. They seem to have kind of cleaned that up as well. And that's been a problem for Ohio State. Hopefully that's something that's going to be fixed also, that Ohio State, their penchant for committing some really careless penalties, hopefully that won't rear its ugly head against Nebraska on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the teams they played too, and I mean, Colorado is a good team, a good football team, and that's kind of a little bit of a forgotten rivalry game, Colorado and Nebraska from the old Big 8 games, Big 8 days. They lost to Purdue, they lost to Wisconsin, they lost to Northwestern, a bit of a heartbreaker. I think they had I think a curious call that in that game that ended up coming back to bite them, left too much time on the clock, that kind of thing. And I watched some of the game where they buried Minnesota. They kind of took a big lead. Minnesota crept back in it, and then Nebraska came roaring back and beat them handily. So I saw part of that game, and I think that this kid, Martinez, is good. I think he's a guy that's going to create problems. But you mentioned some great athletes for this team: Spielman, Stanley Morgan Jr. These guys are going to get yards. They can run the ball very well. Divine Ozigbo's a good back. He's averaging almost 7.5 yards a carry. He's on pace to go over 1,000 yards this season. So they've got talent on the offensive side of the ball. They've struggled a bit on the defensive side of the ball. Just to complete my thoughts on the offense, they're running for about 221 yards a game. That's 29th in the country. The passing offense is 47th in the country, 251 yards a game. So, when you're averaging almost 500 yards a game, that's a pretty good offense. Their scoring offense, however, only at number 63. They're scoring 29.8, so 30 points a game, which is nothing to sneeze at, especially when you're looking at Ohio State's scoring defense, especially over the last several weeks. So Nebraska's offense is going to probably move the ball. Ohio State is going to have to be good in the red zone and force field goals. Defensively is where Nebraska has struggled. Total defense, they're ranked, Chip, 102nd in the country, giving up 438 yards per game. They give up 33.5 points a game. That's 101st in the country for scoring defense. Their rush defense is 71st in the country, 166 yards per game. Where they really struggle is against the pass. 111th in the country, giving up 272 per game. That you have to like as an Ohio State fan, because Dwayne Haskins in Zone 6 can do their thing.
I do like it. If anything, what I'm hoping for on Saturday is let's attack Nebraska where they are weak, and that is, as you said, giving up, as you said, like an average of 272 yards through the air per game. Dwayne Haskins, those talented wide receivers, let's hit them where it hurts. Let's get a big lead, and then here's what I'm hoping is let's see what we've worked on during that bye week, which means being able to run the ball when we want to in the second half and wear this team down even further. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I would like to see them pound the rock a little bit in this game. I would like to see them, if they have to use the pass to set up the run, then so be it. I mean, that's what, Purdue said, Jeff Brom said Purdue did against Ohio State. They threw the ball, they brought those linebackers up to the line of scrimmage, and then they ran the ball and popped some big runs that way. I think that there's things that Ohio State can do to keep those safeties back, hit a couple of balls over the top. You don't even have to really hit them as long as you attempt them and, have that as a threat. And then once the once the Cornhuskers are being honest and not crowding line of scrimmage, then you try to run the ball. And I think that this team is capable of doing that. They have the athletes to do that. Hopefully in the bye week they found the right combination of things to do, whether it's calling different plays, changing up schemes, little tweaks to the scheme, probably not overhauling anything in a week. Hopefully they found the right buttons to push to get that running game back on track.
Yeah, I think that one of the questions that everyone has is, are we going to see Tate Martell? And I know we kind of made, I don't want to say a vow, but we kind of, we said, we didn't want to make those predictions anymore, but it is going to bear watching to see when and if Tate Martell is going to be participating in this game.
Yeah, I just said I'm not guaranteeing a Tate Martell appearance anymore. And ever since the guarantee, he hasn't played a single down.
Well, like I said, it just kind of it's perplexing, especially considering Ohio State struggles in the red zone against Minnesota, against Purdue. I'm not saying that you want to make it that blatantly obvious that, okay, as soon as you're within the red zone, okay, here comes Tate. But trying to figure out something, as Urban Meyer even said, that they acknowledge the fact that they've got to get better in the red zone. They've got to get better in the running game. And I can't think of anyone better who could kind of, if necessarily, maybe not in the red zone per se, but, just kind of as a change of pace, so to speak, kind of maybe be a spark for that running game, maybe even early in the game, but just something to kind of, give the fans an idea that they definitely worked on improving some areas that were not working so well during that bye week.
Yeah, you kind of triggered me there, Chip. I know you didn't mean to. The thing that I'm waiting for people to do in this day and age of mobile quarterbacks, and I think Ohio State had the personnel to do this for years, is they need to have some packages where you put a second quarterback in the backfield. Then you have, I don't know how many different variations of plays you can run off that, but it's got to keep the defense somewhat confused, especially if you put the two quarterbacks right next to each other, like Dobbins is always right next to Dobbins and Weber are always right next to Dwayne Haskins. You put Tate Martell on one side, put a running back on the other side. That ball could be snapped to Martell. It could be snapped to Haskins. Haskins can hand it off to either guy. He can pitch it to either guy. He can throw a pass. He can give off to Martell, who can throw a pass. Any number of combinations and are in play in that package, and I don't know why teams are leaving their weapons in their holsters. And I think that if I were a coach, I would probably be one of those Mike Leach types who just sort of pioneers this. It's like, okay, we've got these good players. These are the things we can do with them. Why not do them? I mean, this is something I thought of, back when Braxton Miller was still on the team. It's like, okay, you got these guys. They're all really good at a lot of things. Let's use the entire toolbox. And for whatever reason, coaches don't want to do that. Maybe it's just they don't want to spend the practice time on it. I couldn't tell you. But that's something that I would install. So, someday when I become a football coach, you recruits out there, you should come play for me.
And just keep in mind, this is just something to kind of it's been, I don't want to say completely forgotten, but it's been close to a month since Ohio State went on the road and won at Penn State. But something that you said, maybe, like your offensive strategy of having the two quarterbacks, that's something that Penn State tried to do against Ohio State. If you recall, that they actually had their backup Tommy Stevens in, and McSorley, now granted it didn't work out perfectly well in terms of like when they tried to do the pass, back to Tommy Stevens, who would have then thrown deep or something like that. But I agree with you. I think the idea of trying to get your best players on the field and put them in positions to succeed, I think you're onto something. Hopefully, we'll have somebody get this information onto Ryan Day and Kevin Wilson, and we'll give you the full credit, for when they implement the two quarterbacks on the field at the same time.
I am fully willing to relocate for a hefty consulting fee.
So that's very big of you. That's good.
Yes, you're right. That was something that Penn State did have a package for, and it looked like had McSorley gotten the ball to Stevens accurately, it looked like they had something cooking there, but he did not. So it was an execution issue and not a scheme issue or not a problem with the players themselves. It was just a lack of execution on those, and thank God that they didn't hit on those, because that was a close game as it was. And it took everything Ohio State had just to come back and win that game by a single point. So, Chip, before we get out of here, we got to give our predictions for this weekend, and we didn't. We did get the score correct. Didn't get the score correct. We got the correct winner of the last game, and I believe we were the only two at the Ozone that picked Purdue to win. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So Ohio State, Nebraska, noon kickoff in Ohio Stadium. Black uniforms for the Buckeyes as they wear their alternates in a day game, which for some reason was promoted as a blackout with all these really dark videos as if it was a night game, but it's not a night game, it's a noon game, which is a little odd. I do like the helmets. I'm not a big fan overall of the alternate uniforms, because I love Ohio State's uniforms and I think that they are iconic and that they should always be worn. But as far as alternates go, I don't hate these, and I really love the helmets. They're really nice looking helmets.
See, I'm just a traditionalist. I still want the gray back on the scarlet jerseys, on the gray on the sleeves like they used to have. I don't see any need.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you. But this is the new world we live in, and I'm just saying that I'm with you in terms of being a traditionalist. But if they have to do this, they have done worse uniforms than these.
The reason why I just, for everyone that says, oh, they have to do this, like Alabama does not seem to have any issue with recruiting, and they never do anything like this.
I know they don't have to do this. I understand they don't have to. It's their choice. They would rather print more money. And I'm with you on all of these things. I'm just saying, if they are going to do it to make them look nice, and I thought they did an okay job of making them look nice. I watched a little bit of the Arizona game the other night, and Arizona looked like they were playing in pajamas. Arizona and Oregon, and Oregon's uniforms were horrible. And there were these white jerseys with these weird-looking black numbers, and they had like black nameplates with white letters, so it was like a white jersey with a black rectangle on the back with the name in white on that, and the helmets were black, and it was just, those were ugly. But Arizona had red tops, red bottoms, and it looked like they were wearing pajamas.
Well, you mentioned how Ohio State they're trying to really play up the whole blackout the shoe thing, but even though it's a noon kickoff, and kind of, I think that this was one of these things where the best laid plans, truly did not come to fruition, because let's face it, I think Ohio State, they were anticipating having this as a night game, and then, oh, by the way, they get beat on the road by Purdue, and at the time Nebraska was probably like they had just had one win, and so I think the network executives that kind of get to call the shots said, something, you guys, we're gonna do the noon kickoff for you. And I'm sure the plans for the alternate uniforms had been well conceived a long time ago, so it's like, okay, great, we got to do it at noon. So that's just my opinion. I just think it's like I can't prove anything I just said, but I just think it kind of the circumstances of what led this to be a noon kickoff was kind of that there was probably a strong anticipation of, we'll get a night game, and then Actually, no, you guys aren't, and you're not slated for a night game. If anything, I know we have to talk about Nebraska and with a prediction here. I'm just thrilled that next week when we talk about Michigan State, the kickoff has not been officially determined, but we know it's not going to be a night game.
Yeah, what's the deal with Ohio State didn't have a home night game this year, right?
Right. This is the first time, and I might get this wrong. This is where one of our loyal listeners could email us and let me know if I'm mistaken. I think for the first time since 2007, and that's what I've heard, is that this is the first time Ohio State has not had a night game, and Urban Meyer loves the night games for recruiting purposes, but it didn't seem to really work out. I'm sure that the Nebraska game was the one that they were targeting, but it just, say what you will, Ohio State, failing to uphold their end of the deal against Purdue, Nebraska coming in with a lackluster record, combination of both. I don't know what, but it's the kind of thing where Ohio State, no night game in the horseshoe this year.
All right, don't say targeting because you'll trigger me again.
Okay.
But we don't get to have a night game, but we get to be everyone else's night game. Purdue, Penn State, TCU at a quote unquote neutral site, but no home game, no night game in the shoe, which is really ridiculous. I did think Nebraska was going to be a night game this year, but when I looked at the schedule, I thought, well, you're not going to do it for Rutgers or Oregon State or Tulane and everything. I could have seen him maybe an Indiana, maybe, but probably not. And so Nebraska seemed the logical one, and it wasn't going to be Michigan. So they don't get one. It's fine, but don't promote it like it's one because it's dumb. It's really just dumb to promote it like it's one when it isn't one. And I don't know how far in advance they were doing that, maybe assuming it was going to be a night game, but they should have scrapped that. Anyway, so I'm going to give you my prediction first for a change.
Okay.
Because it always seems like I'm ripping you off when I go second.
No, I don't take it like that, but
you're not the listeners. The listeners might be taking it that way. I don't know.
Okay.
I have to go first just once in a while, just to mix things up. I'm going to say that this is going to be a high-scoring game, Chip, and I think that Ohio State is going to prevail and get back in the win column. I'm going to call it 42-30 Buckeyes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I agree with you. I think it's going to be high-scoring. I'm of the opinion that Ohio State, they're going to come out. Urban Meyer has often talked about, wanting to have an angry football team, that has an angry staff. Let's hope that comes to pass, because after that performance in West Lafayette a couple weeks ago, you would certainly think that the players, what pride that they have has certainly been blistered. So I'm with you. I think this is going to be high scoring. I think Ohio State, they're going to be able to get some big plays through the air, and I'm hoping for, not predicting, but I'm hoping for the emergence of one of those talented running backs for Ohio State going over 100 yards for the first time in what seems like for forever. So I'm going to go Ohio State 45, Nebraska 28.
Okay, so we're kind of thinking along
close.
The same lines. Yeah. All right, that sounds good. Yeah, instead of an angry football team this year, Urban has angry football fans.
Yeah, they'll definitely be angry if that offense sputters in the red zone and the defense is giving up big plays. You'll definitely hear a lot of angry fans Saturday afternoon.
Absolutely. All right, well, we'll come back next week, Chip, and we will talk about Ohio State against Nebraska. We will look ahead to the Michigan State Spartans on the road, which suddenly looks like it always seemed like a difficult game, but the way Michigan State started the season, it seemed like it might not be quite as difficult, but the way that Michigan State's defense has played the last couple of weeks, it has me once again thinking that Sparty will be thinking in terms of upsets, and it's weird, though, because Ohio State has in recent years seemed to play Michigan State better in East Lansing than in Columbus.
Yeah, and Sparty, they're going on the road to Maryland. So we'll see, kind of, how they do. They certainly looked better with, offensively against Purdue, even with a first time starter at quarterback. So yeah, Sparty's always concerning. I'm just, like I said, I'm counting my blessings. The fact that no matter what, it'll either be a noon kickoff or a 3:30 kickoff. That announcement, we'll know either Saturday evening or Sunday morning as to what the kickoff time is for Ohio State, Michigan State.
Yeah, Maryland coming off a big 30-point win. Of course, it was just against Illinois, but I don't remember the last time a Maryland team scored 60-plus points in a game. So
right,
that would be interesting. I'm looking forward to this slate of Big Ten games this weekend, Chip. I'm anxious to have Ohio State back in action because the worst thing is when you have a bad performance going into a bye week and then you got to wait 2 weeks to see how the team responds. But I'm eager to see what the Buckeyes come up with. I want to see Tate Martell, even if it's not a blowout. I would love them to go back to the fifth possession of the game like they had it going. I know that people speculated, well, you can't have a Tate Martell package because that won't make Dwayne Haskins happy. But do you really need to? I mean, you already have this plan where he's coming in the fifth possession every single game to start the season. I think it's ingrained. I don't think you need to deviate from that, even in the TCU game and that kind of thing. I think Tate should have been playing in these other games. To get a series is not out of the question, especially if you expect Dwayne Haskins to ride his outstanding season into the NFL, and you want to have Tate ready to go for the next season. So it'll be interesting to see how the Buckeyes respond, and we'll come back and we'll talk about it next week and give predictions for Sparty and all that good stuff. Chip, where can people find you online?
They can find me online on Twitter at Chip Minnich. My last name is spelled Minnich. Like Michael, I'm a contributor to the Hayes and Cannon portion of the Ozone.net, as well as to Athlon Sports.
Yes, I did not do a grumpy old Buckeye this week because it would have just been one sentence. I don't like bye weeks. And that would have just
especially when you don't get to see football at an anniversary party.
Yeah, it would have been 2 sentences. Like, I should be allowed to watch football when it's a bye week. But and I usually do. I mean, she's usually really good about leaving me alone during college football season. This was a special thing I think you got to tip your cap to somebody that has a 70th wedding anniversary.
That's impressive. That's very impressive.
Yeah. I mean, we're at we're at 15 and counting. I can't imagine 70. That's amazing. So read our stuff at theozone.net. Of course, subscribe here to this here podcast, and please go on iTunes, leave us some ratings, and tell us what you think of the show. And you can send us questions. I'm at Mike36fan on Twitter, and of course at Chip Minnich. You can hit up either one of us with a question. We'll be happy to answer your questions here on the air. We did put out the call, and nobody had any questions for us, Chip. So everybody knows everything.
Maybe they can help us out with the podcast.
Yeah,
they know so much.
They should, help us out. They should produce this so that I don't have to do the audio editing. Oh, yes. And they should maybe figure out how we can get paid more to do, or even get paid some to do this.
Something, yeah.
They have all the answers anyway. All right, folks, that'll do it for this edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. Please listen to all the stuff on the Ozone Radio Network. There's a lot of great shows. Across the Field with Tony Gerdeman and Tom Orr, The Sons of Schmidt, and the Buckeye Sloopcast. All of our wonderful sister podcasts will give you something basically every weekday, right? Every weekday of the week, we have a new show for you to download and listen to. So, especially good in that morning traffic. You can listen to us, and then you maybe won't get so mad at the guy in the Celica in front of you.
Sounds like something that you deal with on a daily basis.
I do have a long commute, but it's not. It's actually I go out of town, so I'm going away from traffic. But it's a 40-minute drive, so I have lots of time in the morning and afternoon to listen to podcasts in the car, and I take advantage of that. It's good. It makes the time go really fast. So
Absolutely.
All right, we'll do it again next week. Chip, let's get a win against the Cornhuskers. Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!